It's a major challenge to measures the British government says are essential to keep people safe. 10 human rights groups, including Amnesty International, have brought this challenge against electronic surveillance methods used by intelligence agencies to the European Court of Human Rights. They are trying to stop the mass surveillance used by UK and US national intelligence units.
And for us, the biggest concern we have when rich countries, the so-called champions of human rights, start doing this, our biggest concern is the multiplier effect it has in places like Egypt. And you have these people are running police states, and they use the examples of the UK and the US and France to say you're no place to tell anybody about human rights anymore.
The UK's surveillance measures first became public knowledge in 2013, following revelations by the American security contractor Edward Snowden. The classified information leaked by Snowden focused on 3 bulk data interception programs. They are known as PRISM, Upstream and Tempora. Tempora enables the UK's GCHQ to intercept and store all internet activity that enters and exits the country. Upstream allows the US National Security Agency to do the same in America, while PRISM allows the NSA to access all communication passing through US companies. They include Microsoft, Apple, Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Skype, and YouTube. The data is shared between the agencies, and the British government says it's essential to prevent terror attacks.
We have given compelling examples of major threats that were only discovered and repelled by the use of bulk data. They include the triggering of a manhunt for a known terrorist linked to previous attacks on the UK, and the highlighting of links between the terrorist and extremists in the UK.
But the rights groups say government agencies can use the programs to identify whistleblowers and witnesses of human rights violations. They also say the measures infringe on individual privacy rights. But will their arguments be strong enough to sway the courts? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Somerset by Bob Ayers. He's a retired intelligence officer and international security analyst. And from Glasgow, Amir Anwar. He's a criminal defense lawyer and a human rights campaigner. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Amir Anwar, let me begin with you. Do you believe that these civil rights groups have a case against the UK government?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's been described by campaigners as a watershed moment for freedom of speech, for the right to privacy, for citizens right across this planet. I think it's very significant that you have not just Amnesty International, but also Liberty, 11 human rights groups from 4 different parts of the 4 continents, from Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas, saying that this is unacceptable. It's not compliant with human rights legislation. It interferes with our right to privacy, our right to freedom of expression, and the right to a fair trial. And there is no need for the security agencies to have mass surveillance of literally every citizen on this planet.
Bob Ayers, the plaintiffs believe that mass surveillance is taking place and that civil liberties are being curtailed. Is that how you see it?
Oh, no, not at all. The first point to make is that we're not talking about mass surveillance. We're talking about mass collection of data. That's not the same as surveillance. That's simply gathering the information,
Really?
not necessarily even reviewing it. There's another fundamental issue involved here, and that is whether or not there's an expectation of privacy on the internet. When you put information on the internet, you have no assurance of privacy. You're making it available to anyone who wants to look at that traffic. And so for people to claim that their privacy is violated when they put something on the internet is rather silly. It's like standing in a crowd and shouting something out and expecting no one to listen.
Okay, so Amir, why don't you trust the government to be responsible with this information? They're just scooping it all up. It doesn't mean they're going to do anything with it unless you have something to hide.
How convenient for somebody who used to work for the intelligence agencies to say something like that. What I'd say to any of your viewers is simply this. If you're living in a house and the police decided to climb through the window and photograph what you have in your wardrobes, what you have in your bedroom drawers on a daily basis, and then take away that information and say, we're not going to use it, but it may be stored somewhere and used against you in the future, people will be outraged about that. And that's exactly what the governments are doing. The fact remains this. The reason why Amnesty International, Liberty, and other organizations organizations are standing up for the rights of individual citizens across this planet, is that what this is likely to do is impinge on those people that they're spying upon, surveilling, are individuals who are vulnerable sources, people who are providing information, people who are whistleblowers, exactly the sort of people that security agencies want to turn their attentions to. And quite honestly, I have to say this storage of mass data and information doesn't seem to be doing a lot of good in terms of the war on terror. When we look at, for instance, the Manchester terror attack, what we had was an individual that was on the radar of the security agencies, individuals who had actually phoned a hotline about this individual, and that information wasn't used. It simply comes down to this. There is no reason to store all the data of individuals. There's no protections and there's no safeguards. That's one of the fundamental issues when it comes to this. And also in terms of the right to a fair trial, the IPT, which is the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, part of that is held in private, which means that there is no right to fair trial because those who oppose it do not have a right to know what the information is. Now that's unacceptable. We have over the years been told about being trusting our government agencies and security agency, and time again they have found to have been wanting. There's been scandal after scandal after scandal, and where rogue agencies, but also not just rogue agencies, where agencies actually want to use that information, which has been shared with other intelligence agencies around this planet. So not just a case of GCHQ in the UK doing it, but they're sharing it with the United States, they're sharing it with others, and those intelligence agencies may well decide to use that information when it's not actually criminal behavior on behalf of those individuals, but might choose to use it in the form of blackmail, might choose to use it in order to shut people down, or actually systematically witch hunt people who are whistleblowers.
Fair enough. Amir, let me ask you, is there ever a case for example, MI6 to share information with the CIA or other American agencies if they can prove that they're stopping a credible terror plot?
Absolutely, of course there is. I'm not standing against that. Neither is Liberty or American Civil Liberty Union or Amnesty International. What we're talking about is that it should be targeted surveillance. Quite frankly, to have thousands of people sitting just collecting all this data for every citizen on this planet, every person in Europe, is simply useless, because actually what it does is slow down the source of the information. It should be targeted, and time again we have seen those who are intelligence operatives on the ground, security agencies and police officers, say that they need resources for targeted intelligence. Even in terms of, let's say, I would take the recent terror attacks that have taken place in Britain. In terms of carrying out a surveillance operation, it takes about 30 police officers to actually monitor an individual on a 24-hour, 7-day basis. When we actually see thousands of police officers being cut back, this is a convenient excuse to say mass surveillance will somehow stop terror attacks. It won't.
Okay, so let me
then ask probably
Bob.
Make it worse, because we won't have the police officers on the ground.
Okay, so Bob, sometimes with all this technology, sometimes it becomes difficult to have the conversation simply. So let's dial back all the technology and just think of this as maybe like wiretapping, right? Isn't it more efficient and more fair to get a court order to have reasonable suspicion of somebody before you tap their phone, rather than to tap everybody's phone and have all this noise and then try to pluck out whatever might be relevant? Amir's saying this doesn't work. It's a bunch of noise and you don't even have the manpower to deal with it. What do you think, Bob?
Well, I think, first of all, that if I can embrace the sort of concept that my colleague used when he opened his remarks, how typical for a person who is a human rights lawyer to ignore reality and look for the most trivial thing and escalate it into a major event. Now, back to I was quiet while your colleague ran his mouth for about 10 minutes. I could have gone down and had a cup of coffee while waiting for him to stop. Let's go back to the question at hand and debate points and not make speeches.
With respect, I didn't
like
run
my
my mouth, and I represent some of the most vulnerable people in society. You may well be a retired intelligence official, but quite frankly, you're not working on some case right now.
Okay, go ahead, Bob.
Will you please take charge? Yes, please.
Listen, I'm not in Guantanamo Bay for you to interrogate me or to insult me
we
like
got the
that
point,
right
Amir.
now, so.
Okay, let the man finish his point.
Listen, I'm
Go ahead, Bob.
Continue this if you can't control that man. You hear me? I'm not going to continue this if you can't control your guest.
What are you going to do?
He can't
Send the
control
CIA
himself.
out for me? Quite frankly, I mean, your comments are unacceptable.
With such a weasel like you.
Okay, Amir, the man's got a choppy Skype connection, so to make things easier, just give him a chance to finish his point. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, he can.
There is no point to make. There is no question before me. All I've heard was a human rights rant I haven't heard a point yet. I haven't heard a fact yet. Now, if you want to put some facts on the table, we can talk facts. You can sit there and grin all you want, but all you do is talk and prevent anyone else from addressing what you're saying. You had a run-on statement.
What's
you
your
wrapped
point?
up just about. I don't have a point.
Get to your
I was
point,
waiting for you to make a
Bob.
point.
Get to your point. You don't have a point.
You're the one that wants to run your mouth.
We have a
Okay,
point.
hold
That's
on.
why it's in Strasbourg.
Let me ask
That's
Bob,
why it's at the European
Bob, let me
Court of
ask you a
Human
very
Rights.
Bob, let me ask you a very direct question, Bob. Tell me why you
Sure.
feel there is a need for the bulk collection of data and then to sift through all of that data to find the bad guys rather than to identify who might be a reasonable threat and then to interrogate the information from that perspective. Tell me why you feel all the information needs to be scooped up first.
Well, let's talk about several of the recent events in London. There were attacks that were made. There were people that were killed. And after the event, the security services went back and looked at information that had been collected, but not exploited, collected, but not subjected to human scrutiny. They went through the information that had been collected and they were able to construct a pattern, a network, contacts, and other information that had direct relevance to the crime that had been committed. Now, that's what happens when you have bulk collection of data. You have it available if you need to consult it. If you don't collect it, it's not available for consultation, it's not available for exploration, and it's certainly not available to try to apprehend or build a case against the criminal.
Bob, do you have absolute trust in the authorities not to misuse the data? Because I remember speaking to Bill Binney, who helped the NSA design a lot of this infrastructure and a lot of this technology. So you have these undersea cables. You can actually just sort of jump in. In the UK, they use Tempora, if I understand it correctly. There's Upstream and Prism that the US uses. You can actually just jump in and sort of grab a whole bunch of data from the undersea cables, and that gets stored forever and ever. Do you have absolute trust in the institutions, Bob, for any of that or none of that information to be used for the wrong purposes?
I do not have absolute trust in any individual in government to not violate the safeguards, the security, or the law. It's happened too many times in the past. We don't have to argue whether or not absolute trust is a possibility. It's not. But what we do have, at least in democratic countries, is we establish mechanisms to provide oversight for the intelligence operations conducted by that country. And those representatives are usually the elected representatives of the people. So what we're in effect doing is trusting an elected representative to ensure that the intelligence organizations operate within the law.
Not in the UK.
Now,
Okay, so let's take that to Amir. So sorry to interrupt you, Bob. Let's take that to Amir. Amir, in a democracy with proper checks and balances, you have the oversight that you need. And if somebody screws up, they'll face the consequences.
Absolutely.
They'll go to jail for stealing people's information and so on. This isn't China. This is the UK, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why this isn't on a whim. This isn't someone running off their mouth. This is why it is before the Strasbourg Court, European Court of Human Rights, because one of the arguments, one of the three main arguments, one of the central arguments here is that the IPT, the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, not elected representatives, as Bob likes to go, we're not in the United States, we're in the UK. What that actually is being said in that courtroom is that there is no right to fair trial because part of the hearing is held in private. There is no discretion. There is no effective remedy. That's why it's been challenged, because what Amnesty International and Liberty are saying is that there is no effective remedy. There is no protections and there is no safeguards for those security agencies, which Bob has no absolute trust in. In terms of that, there's no total trust in those organizations and security agencies, and that's why you need protections and safeguards, and the ones that exist at the moment are not sufficient, and what we need to see is more sufficient safeguards in order that we can challenge it as and when it's required. The argument, of course, that Bob used was that, because if you put something on the internet, that's almost like saying, just because you use a telephone and phone somebody on your mobile, then we should have every single mobile phone call and every telephone call conversation listened into and hacked into. The issue issue arises again and again in terms of mass surveillance. If you carry out mass surveillance, and you can play semantics all you want, because that's what it is mass surveillance. It doesn't get around the point that Bob made, that during the attacks in the UK, we have seen time and time again, individuals who were on the security services radar, targeted intelligence did not take place, and as a result, people died. That is the question should be asked, why more officers weren't detailed to follow those individuals, why is we were let down, why people in this country lost their lives as a result of that, rather than simply saying that the convenient excuse and the convenient way around this is mass surveillance.
Okay.
People will die. People will die if we see more police officers caught on the streets of London or the rest of the country.
So Bob, Amir is disappointed that there isn't enough targeted attention at people who, I guess, are flagged, and he feels that everybody's wasting their time sifting through the fog, going through everybody else's private WhatsApp messages. Doesn't the man make a good point?
I'm really not sure what the point is. On one hand, he's complaining that we shouldn't collect
dictionary,
a large amount of information on, and then, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you know,
every citizen. On every citizen. As I said, I gave you a parallel example.
Are you done now?
No, I'm not done. As I said, every citizen, if somebody wanted to come in your house every day and photograph what you've got in your bedroom drawers, your wardrobes, etc., you would say that you needed a warrant to do that.
So Bob,
why is it not applicable to the computers or your internet?
Fair enough, Amir. So Bob, that analogy, that this is just like somebody going through your wardrobe, address that.
I hate to do this to you, but I'm getting really tired of this. I can't make a point without being interrupted. You let the other man run his mouth on and on and on and talk over me. I'm not going to subject myself to this. I'm terminating this interview. I'll see you later. Goodbye.
You can't have a civil conversation here, Bob. I'm asking you a very direct question. Okay, so we lost Bob there. We're not going to edit this out or anything. Okay, Amir, let me ask you about the UK then. We've lost Bob. Bob doesn't want to have the conversation anymore. He feels he was treated unfairly. Let me broaden this out to the UK in general, right? And so we look at the Snoopers Charter last year, and then we look at the general trend in the country. There's a feeling, especially when you look at the fact that with CCTV cameras, British people, I guess, are seen more by CCTV cameras than any other citizens on the planet.
Yes.
Do you feel as if this kind of big brother police state is encroaching upon you and encroaching on the rights of individual citizens?
I think it is. It's the issue comes down to this, and the analogy I use is one that, I mean, I think most ordinary people, police officers always say, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. But if somebody turned around to, let's say, a member of the public and say that there should be a camera installed in every single person's house, and don't worry about it, because the police and the security agencies aren't actually going to look at it, they're never going to use it, it's just in case. It's that just in case argument that doesn't work, because where you do have, we have seen time and time again, where the police and the security services, and we shouldn't forget, the security services aren't lily white in the United Kingdom. We are talking about organisations in the past, such as Special Branch. We have seen numerous cases over the years with regards to the police, where people have gone overboard, where people have, police officers and the members of the security services have broken the law in order to incriminate, in order to frame individuals, and then subsequently, many years later, 20 years, 25, 30 years later, we find out people were innocent or they had their lives destroyed because of the actions of the state. We saw it for prime example of that during the miners' strike, for instance. We saw examples of that during Hillsborough. We've seen that examples of that during, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, where members of the Lawrence family were spied on by, the Metropolitan Police. We have an inquiry going on to spy cops at the moment. And what we see is examples of where you don't have the necessary protections and safeguards. And of course, the vast majority of society says, well, I've got nothing to hide, so I've got nothing to fear. And then lo and behold, one day, you have a situation that arises where you think, I didn't do anything wrong. But all of a sudden, somebody delves into your past and you all of a sudden are framed, or something is used against you where it might not be criminal. But all of a sudden, a phone call takes place, because we see it in many of the cases that we deal with. Security services will contact an individual and say, listen, we could turn your life upside down if you don't cooperate with us, because we know this about your background.
Right.
We know, for instance, that you're having an affair with someone. We know that you are a homosexual. All these situations have occurred in the past, continue continue to happen. But it's not criminal behavior, but the security services utilize the information that they have against you in order to put you in a scenario that you do not want to be in. And that is not acceptable in a civilized or a democratic society. And Bob, incidentally, liked to talk about, human rights lawyers shouting off their mouths. We are what stands between. We are the ones who stand up for democracy and the right to a free society. My children, my family walk on the same streets and are just as likely to use the same transport system, are just as likely to walk across the same bridges, and just as likely to be blown up by a terrorist attack or to be shot. I was in Barcelona on the streets the day that the gunman and the van drove for that crowd. I missed the van by seconds. Right. By seconds. That does not make me say that we suspend our human rights or our civil democracy or the issues that we take for often for granted, because if we do, then the terrorists do win. The terrorists would like to see mass surveillance. They would like to see every person in this country subjected to such surveillance.
Okay, Amir, I'm also going to terminate this, but for the right reasons, I have to move on. It's a pity that Bob had to leave us a little bit earlier on. He didn't want to continue with the debate, but it's been a pleasure talking to both of you, Amir Anwar and earlier Bob Ayers. It's a good conversation. We'll be looking forward to that verdict. Speak to you soon.